Hello, good evening. Welcome to Surrey Police Live. Thank you for choosing Surrey Police Facebook tonight. I'm Mike Hodder. I'm your host tonight, and we're going to be talking about modern slavery, how to spot it, what it is, what effect it has on our community. And we've got some officers with us that will be chatting through some operations, and you'll be looking behind the curtain about the policing stance towards modern slavery and what we do. So first up, let's have a look at the news.
Hi there, I'm Mampton Oakes, a detective constable working in the investigation training unit, and I'll be bringing you the latest news from Surrey Police this week. A serious organised crime leader has been jailed for 6 years and 8 months after pleading guilty to conspiring to supply cannabis following a large-scale investigation spanning multiple counties. Mustafa Alster was sentenced at Guildford Crown Court last Friday after he was identified as the main suspect in a case which uncovered 12 cannabis farms housed in industrial units across the southeast of England between 2016 and 2021. The judge who sentenced Alster said it was difficult to envisage a more serious case of production of cannabis. PC Catherine Sandys, who investigated the case, said Mustafa Alster really believed he was above the law, orchestrating this huge illegal business to grow cannabis in vast quantities. His activity caused huge financial costs to those he rented these buildings from, with the setup and equipment causing significant damage to each location. Not only this, but some of the locations were also burgled, bringing more crime to the area in which the cannabis factories were set up. Catherine went on to say that officers rely on members of the public for intelligence around drug dealing and criminal activity occurring in local communities. You can read more about how to spot the signs and how to report drug dealing on our website. And next up this evening, officers are encouraging residents with dogs to be mindful of livestock worrying after a flock of sheep were attacked by a dog in Tadworth on Sunday. Sadly, a 2-month-old lamb died from its injuries, and 5 other lambs were injured as a result of the attack. Livestock worrying is when a dog frightens or attacks farm animals, including by barking or chasing them, and can result in serious injury or even death by shock. As well as the traumatic effect on the animal, livestock worrying can also have a huge impact on the farmer and their livelihood. If your dog attacks an animal, you should try to find the owner and explain to them what has happened. And remember that even on a lead, dogs can worry livestock. So always check whether your dog's behaviour could be harmful to other animals. More information about livestock worrying and the incident in Tadworth last week can be found on our website. And lastly, we're asking for the public's help this evening in finding a car which was stolen from Hindhead on Saturday. The Land Rover was parked in a car park on Heather Way when it was stolen sometime in the afternoon between 12:30 and 2:50 p.m. At the time of being stolen, it had plastic sheeting covering the back window, as shown in this image. Officers who are working to locate the car and return it to its owner, who depend on the vehicle for work. If you've seen it or have any information which could assist our investigation, please contact us via direct message on Facebook or on our website. And that's all from me. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, to read you the latest headlines from Surrey Police.
Always good to see what's going on. Thank you for that news update. Welcome back, and this episode is about modern slavery. And our panellists tonight are 3 officers with a wealth of experience and knowledge, and hopefully we'll get to look behind the curtain of policing and that subject of modern slavery and the impact it has on our communities and those involved. So first of all, let me introduce our panellists. And first up is Kerry. Good evening, Kerry.
Hi, Mike. Hello, everyone. I'm Detective Chief Inspector Kerry Lovelace. My role is as the Strategic Surrey Force Lead for Modern Slavery, Human Trafficking and Immigration Crime.
No, that's a title. You can't have that on a badge, though.
No,
can you?
definitely not. You'd need a few, wouldn't
you?
you?
Yeah, you need a few. Thanks, Kerry. Lovely to have you. And from Runnymede
Evening, James Wyatt, Runnymede Borough Commander. So day job of looking after the Borough of Runnymede, leading our Safer Neighbourhood team, but I also work as the Modern Slavery lead for North Surrey, so looking at improving our partnership work, engagement and education, as well as improvement investigations.
So a wealth of knowledge already, but not to be outdone, finally our third panellist. Good evening.
My name is Martin Linton. I'm a detective sergeant. I work in modern slavery and organised immigration crime. My job is I'm the tactical lead for the force, and I get involved with proactive and reactive investigation as well as preventative work and awareness.
So thanks so much for being with us. Modern slavery really a topical subject because it affects so many people. And modern slavery, we can think of many things, but what exactly is it? So James, just from a neighbourhood point of view, so you look after the community in Runnymede.
Yeah.
So what does modern slavery either mean to you, or how do you describe it to your community?
So modern slavery is really the exploitation of vulnerable people through many different types of exploitation. So you could have sexual exploitation through brothels, for example, or child sexual exploitation, forced labour, for example, in car washes and nail bars, domestic servitude, when people are working for little or no pay. So it's quite a wide range of kind of areas of modern slavery, and really the key is the effect it has on the community and also the individual involved. And the fact it's such a hidden crime. So when I speak to residents of Runnymede, they're surprised about this because it is very well hidden, but it is everywhere. It's it's very prevalent across the country, and that's the case in Runnymede and Surrey as well.
So it's an interesting point that you make about it's been hidden. So we go about our daily business, and we all look for a bargain, or we all look for somewhere to go that maybe is cheaper than a competitor. And maybe we're not thinking of why it's cheaper. Because you say hidden, and presumably I'm just thinking simplistically. I'll turn to you, Martin, because you're the tactical lead. But simplistically, almost, James mentioned car washes, but nail bars and areas like that. So simple things that everybody uses. Is that where we could see modern slavery?
You've got two sides to it, really. You've got the hidden side, which would be your exploitation behind closed doors, your brothels, and those sorts of environments. But then you've also you hear the expression "hidden in plain sight." Mm-hmm. If you're getting your car washed inside and out for £5, I would say that person is not getting paid a fair wage. So hidden in plain sight is your car washes. And you like, but then the hidden side, like behind the curtain, if you want to use that phrase, is your brothels. You've also got your drug supply stuff going on there as well. You use your children to supply your drugs, and it's very rare. Well, I say very rare. It's not every day that crimes of these type walk in. You don't get people walking into police stations very often saying, "I need help." You have to physically go and look for it.
Now, is that because people can be forced into it? So when we talk about modern slavery, it's not necessarily through European borders or international borders. It can be just internally, can't it?
It can be anyone, and I think what we need to do is, when you hear the term slavery, people think chains. Like historically, it's really not the case. The chains may be there, but they're invisible. It's more mentally, and it's not just a particular nation or nationality. It's happening. When you look at the figures, and there's a lot of people lived in the UK all their life that are victims to this. So it can be anyone and of any age.
And somebody might think, well, they are getting paid. I'm paying somebody for either my nails or my car being washed. But Kerry, the impact on that person, we know through a policing perspective, through our lens, that actually they're living in poor conditions. They're not getting the money that we think maybe they're getting, and they're held to ransom almost. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just because you're handing over money to somebody it doesn't mean the person's keeping that money. You have no idea, whether they're actually making any money out of that, whether they're not. As you say, there's very often arrangements when you're talking about non-UK nationals that the accommodation and the work go together, and we've encountered awful scenarios where, particularly around car washes, people are living on site in what are essentially storage containers and have been converted for that purposes. Very often people haven't got the right equipment. If you're out washing cars in winter, you'd expect people to have wellies, you'd expect them to have big coats, and they often don't. And of course, for non-UK nationals as well, there's the language barrier. And actually what those individuals, and this is the same across all exploitation, have been told about the British police and British services. Very often they're instructed not to interact with us. They've been told lots of lies about the way that we treat people and what's likely to happen to them. And so actually, yes, you can go and get these services more cheaply, but actually what you're seeing is not the human cost that sits behind you having your car washed for £5. And this is not a short-term thing. We've had people who have been, in this country 10 years and they're still working to pay off debts that they accrued to get here from some countries.
But unfair debts, isn't it? It's not really a debt, is it?
No, of course it can't be. There's an amount to get into the country, often by illicit means. Very often people are coming here because they're coming from somewhere that's worse and they're vulnerable. They're very unlikely to have that money. And so the condition of entry is you work until you've paid that off. Yeah. And of course, what happens then is actually it's the person you're indebted to who will decide when you've paid it off. And you'll never
pay it off.
No, absolutely. And as I said, we've had a case really recently where someone's been in the country for nearly 10 years, committing crime daily for 10 years to pay off merely their debt to enter the country. So it's really about, the human cost that sits behind. It's what you don't see, what it does to those people.
Heartbreaking.
You've got also a case where people are sold, particularly in the sex trafficking world. You may pay a debt off to one trafficker, and then that member of the organised crime group sells you to somebody else, and then you've got another debt that you've got to pay.
So you're imprisoned within a society that is blind to it. Is what we could look at.
I've done some work recently with a lady who was in effect sold 4 times, and that just never goes away.
And do you think in the 21st century that would still be going on? I mean, it's horrific to think, isn't it? And Kerry, you said that people that come to our country are coming for a better life. They're coming for the hope of a future. So imagine what they're leaving behind.
Absolutely.
And then coming here. So really heartbreaking stuff. What do we as police officers do then? I guess we do operations, and I say I guess, I kind of know we do. But James, let's talk about anything that you think might be worth mentioning that would raise the profile about how we're tackling this.
Yeah, of course. So we engage in regular operations to try and not only pursue the people we believe are trafficking and exploiting people, but also educational and working with partners to develop that awareness and signs of exploitation to members of the public. So we take part in regular weekly intensifications where we'll work with those partners and try and raise the profile and target those individuals. And we've also taken part in a day of action, which people may have seen on our social media pages, where as a force we've come together alongside partner agencies, part of the charitable sector and volunteers from the public to do all those things to target those individuals and really raise that profile. And Kerry, I don't know if you want to go into a bit more detail about.
So we did the kind of big operation that we did actually on Tuesday this week was Operation Wipeout, and that was tackling modern slavery and organised immigration crime. And we brought out 170 police officers, staff, and volunteers from about 15 different agencies.
Just on that though, Kerry, really interesting. It's not just a policing issue. So this is a wide-ranging solution to support people that are in slavery conditions. Yes,
absolutely. I mean, policing is only part of the response. Our job is enforcement and safeguarding, but there's so much more that we need to enable us to do that. We need our communities to understand, every community, that it's in every community. But just because you can't see it, you don't know the signs of it, it doesn't mean it's not there. And so a really important element is that awareness raising. And we go into different sectors as well, like health, into education settings. This week we did some work with taxi drivers, hotels, and again, some stuff at car washes and nail bars, lots and lots of different spaces we did work in this week to really try and raise the profile around modern slavery. And we also did some work in the organised immigration crime space, which was an operation that Martin also led as part of that day.
Well, before we have a look at a short video to highlight what you and the officers have done, Amanda, thank you so much for sending us a question. Amanda is quite rightly asking, what kind of questions can members of the public ask to kind of understand if someone's in danger? Because we talk about domestic violence, and there are ways that people can elicit help from doctors or from medical staff or others. Martin, as a tactical lead, is there anything, Amanda raises a good question, is there anything that members of the public in our community can watch out for, or are some subtle questions?
I think my initial thing would be, if it doesn't look right or doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. And particularly, when we look at sexual exploitation, it will be the odd comings and goings from houses. A lot of the time, a lot of these brothels are identified as a result of intelligence from the community, where people have seen things that aren't right, and then we've gone in and we have ultimately recovered victims of trafficking. A lot of the time, if you were to ask a direct question, they're not going to say yes. I need help. But it's just looking for these telltale signs. Are people withdrawn? Do they, is there a lack of confidence? Do they not engage with people? It's
almost subservient to somebody else that they're working with, or something like that. Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you do get that, and it might be that somebody they've always got somebody with them. They're being taken out. Are they dressed in a particular way that suggests they may be, into sex work and going out in they're being driven around, all sorts of different things like that people would see and think, that's not quite right. If it doesn't feel right, I would say tell somebody.
It's not right.
It's a bit of a wide answer, but we all know our communities. Yeah. We all know who's living around us, and we all know who's around.
I think then from Amanda, I think the clear direction from us, or plea from us, really is give us that information. You might not think it's relevant, but that little bit of information might be the bigger part of the jigsaw. And I interrupted you, Kerry, just to get that question in, but let's go back to your operation.
Yes, so
thanks, Amanda.
Just in relation to Amanda, there is nothing wrong with saying to somebody, "You okay?" There is fundamentally, there's nothing wrong with that. As Martin says correctly, people might say no, and you would expect to see some other circumstances alongside that. But actually, there's nothing wrong with that, asking that simple question, because somebody might just say yes. Yeah. And so I would encourage people, if they feel able to.
Let me open that one then. So if somebody says yes, what action would we encourage somebody to do? So say you came to me and I went, yes, please, can you help me?
Yeah. Okay.
What would we expect from our communities?
I think what we would then be looking at is to understand the circumstances and the I suppose the criticality of the circumstances that person is in, and actually how quickly we need to respond to that. Obviously police we're there to respond quickly. We take care of safeguarding. We're supported by other agencies in force, that's justice and care. We're also supported by their voice and street light in relation to sex work. So we've got access to loads and loads of charities. So if somebody was to say, yes, I need help, I would encourage, assuming that that's the kind of help and it's not medical help as a priority, is actually, is to call the services, take that person if you can to somewhere where they are safe for a short period of time until we can actually get there and we can start those conversations with that individual. And it might be, that they don't want to engage with police. Not everybody does, but the reality is if they don't want to, that's not the end of the line. There are lots of services that we can put in for those individuals, lots of partners we can bring in to support them. This isn't about you having to have a police investigation, you having to prosecute somebody. It isn't about that. First and foremost, this is about safeguarding in whatever way the victim wants to be safeguarded, and we can do that lots of different ways. But actually let us know, and then we can make those things happen and keep people safe.
Yeah, really encouraging. I know, James, you and I were talking before the programme started about the importance of of that community engagement and that understanding.
Yeah.
Do you have a quick, let's expand on that quickly, and then I promise viewers, we'll have that video of Kerry and Martin's operation. But I think this is important that we because the community are reaching out to us, and we're here to serve, and I think it's important that we build that. So, James, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So community information is essentially what we build so much of our police action from, across all of our activity, but especially with modern slavery, because the community, their eyes and ears, they're engaging with these services quite often, and they see these telltale signs, these signs of exploitation we've spoken about. So when that information comes through to us, we may already have some information on that individual or location, and it all forms part of a bigger picture, which we then work with our partners on. So I will work alongside colleagues in immigration, HMRC, our regional organised crime teams, as well as local borough councils, to look at how we can tackle that issue, whether that be taking action against that location and safeguarding people there, or something kind of a more covert. But it all starts from that one piece of information.
It's that old saying, Martin, is it that little seed of information could grow into quite a big tree, and that
and it has,
operation.
It has, and at the end of the day, we can't just go knocking on random doors. If we're going to a magistrate will want to know, for the purpose of a warrant, well, what do you know? And it's these little bits that do make the difference. And once you're talking to a magistrate and you're saying, can I have a warrant to enter these premises, the fact that people are reporting things makes the big difference, because they've gone out their way to report it, so clearly they feel that we need to know. And we can't do that unless people are telling us what's going on. We are in a time where we have to be more targeted. Unless people are saying, I would look into that, we might not necessarily know to.
So it's like all policing, really. We absolutely rely on our communities and the information that's provided to us to enable us to safeguard people, and that's the key. So on that, let's have a look at a video, and this will summarise the operation that Kerry was talking about, that Martin and James took part, along with many other officers and partner agencies. Please have a look at this.
We're looking at is targeting lorries that may contain people that are concealed in the back that have come into the country from overseas. We're bringing lorries into dedicated stop sites where partners from immigration will conduct their checks under the Immigration Act. We've got our commercial vehicle units and road policing units here checking the safety of lorries.
Welcome back. So hopefully that gave you a flavour of what the officers were up to. And of course, we were fortunate enough to see Martin in his sparkly fluorescent coat, because he's a detective. He's usually in his suit like he is today, but he had his fluorescent coat on. So we've got a question from Debbie, which I'll come to in a second. But I think And I don't mind who answers really, but what was a standout? Did we have a highlight of the day? And it's difficult to say highlight because it's such a emotive subject, and we're safeguarding people in really difficult circumstances. So apologies for using the word, but what I'm getting at is there anything that we'd like to expand on that operation?
I think from my point of view, there's kind of two elements around the enforcement side of things. We did make 2 arrests on that day for controlling prostitution to well-known human traffickers.
So you're talking about presumably men forcing and controlling females to engage in sexual activity against their will.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 arrests were made, and we're obviously in the process of trying to safeguard two victims in this case. And then very much on the other side around the kind of awareness raising across all of the stalls and things we put out. I think we engaged with well over 300 people just through those particular channels, raising awareness. It was really well received by the public, and they were really interested and engaged. And we saw some images there. So that was really amazing. I think the number of partners that volunteered to come on board, a lot of people gave up their time, private individuals that have got other jobs to do because they felt so passionate that they really wanted to come out and join us. And then I think, Martin's work in that we, recovered nearly £10,500 worth of outstanding fines from hauliers who have previously been involved in the trafficking of people. So those are some really real standout stuff. There was so much other good work, absolutely tons. What you've seen is just a snapshot, but it really was a huge force effort between ourselves and partners to really get this message home as quickly.
What's really heartwarming is that you've saved 2 people from forced prostitution. I mean, that is a massive and probably just the tip of the iceberg, I suspect, across the country, if not the world. But that's really heartwarming, and we hope and wish that those ladies are supported and looked after. So Martin, you talked about in your video heavy goods vehicles, and Kerry just mentioned then about them being involved and fined for modern slavery. Just give us a little bit. That sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? So tell us a little bit about that.
There's 2 ways. So I mean, we'll all be very much aware that sadly 39 people died in a lorry in Essex, and that's where a lot of the education from that has sort of highlighted the use of lorries. And lorries is another way. I mean, you hear of boats coming in to the country. Lorries is another one that's popular, and where you've got 2 types of people. So you'd have your organised crime groups that will solely use them for that purpose, and then you have lorry drivers who come into the country quite innocently, who may not be aware that people have jumped on their lorries over in Calais. Now, where the fines come into it is this. Lorry drivers have security measures they can put in place, tilt cords around lorries, security of their lorry. And if a lorry comes in and people have jumped on it without the lorry driver's knowledge, it happens. We know that can be dealt with. That's not a problem. But if they've failed to take sufficient security measures to prevent that, then that's where civil penalties can come in. And that isn't something that the police do. That's dealt with elsewhere. If you don't look after your house and you leave your windows open and your doors, someone may burgle you. Mm-hmm. It's the same sort of thing. If you don't look after your lorry and 10 people jump into the back of it and you've unwillingly facilitated their illegal entry to the country, if you've not taken the measures to prevent that, then yes, you can be fined by another agency.
Lovely.
And that's where these fines come from.
Thanks, Martin. So, folks, thanks for taking part tonight and sending us some questions. So I've got a couple to go through, and I think Debbie's asked one that I'll ask James maybe to cover. Debbie, thank you. Debbie says, if somebody does ask for help, where should they be taken?
Yeah, of course. So I'd speak with them and ask them for their views. A police station would be a place of safety, but also places such as a GP surgery, a hospital, council buildings, anywhere with kind of an official function where they can be safe while you make that call to us, and then we can take it from there.
Stephanie asks, thanks, Stephanie, for getting in contact, she asked actually quite a good question that follows on from Debbie's. And Stephanie says, do we have to be careful in not endangering people by asking them if they are okay? I mean, does it put them at risk? Would they be watched? So it's an interesting question. So, to the panel, from my point of view, fascinating question. And yes, I suspect they are being watched, and it might be very difficult for somebody to open up. But you as experts may have a better answer.
You could ask the question, and if again it goes back to that body language. There's no harm in. It's quite an innocent question to ask, and most people would ask that in day-to-day life anyway. But it would be the response that I would look at. If that response is, yeah, fine, heads down, and it's odd, that would be what triggers it for me.
So that could be where information is passed to Crime Stoppers or to 101, to online police or another agency that we could start building that picture.
Yeah, absolutely. As Martin said, there's nothing wrong at all with asking somebody that they might be being watched, but actually it's like passing time, isn't it, really, with somebody in the street. So obviously if they're with somebody and you're concerned about the person that they're with potentially, that might not be the right time to do that, and it might be actually just a case of reporting that. And actually if people don't want to get in touch with the police, there's a modern slavery helpline where you can report concerns, and there's also Crime Stoppers as well. So there are options there in order to do that. And what we'd encourage people is, as Martin said earlier on, if you think something's wrong, we'd rather you told us and we find out that it's not than actually you not tell us at all.
And the circumstances of that can be so a true story. And do you know what? It's odd when I sort of explain this, but a customer in a brothel called police and said, I've been using brothels for years and I've gone into a place, female's tired, she seems to be on drugs, and I've had to pay the man that's in the house rather than her, and it's just not right.
So
that did lead on to something, and so we're not going to judge you because you've been into a brothel, you've reported something, we've gone on, and we've ultimately got somebody out of a tricky situation. But he was like, listen.
So that's absolutely fascinating, but that shows the power of the information that's provided to us. I mean, like always, what we hope is that you will provide us the information and allow us or other agencies to determine if it's useful or not. So please do provide it to us, because that story that Martin just gave us is fascinating. James, Linda has made contact with us. Thank you. Evening, Linda. She says, are there any signs that someone who is in danger could give to alert a member of the public to their plight? So hand signals, gestures. I'm not familiar with that, but I'm not an expert like you. So is there anything, James?
So nothing I'm aware of that's specific to this kind of the modern slavery sector, like there are in other kind of crime types. But really it's about the things that Martin's been discussing. So those, the body language, if you're asking, are you okay in kind of daily conversation, and they're not discussing that with you, or shying away from that conversation, or looking nervous, then it's those kind of signs. And
so it's reading people.
Yeah, and they could reach out in other ways, such as a note or kind of a comment that doesn't seem quite right in the circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, somebody has asked on YouTube about modern slavery, and does it count if you're not paid average wages? So I'm assuming this might be about not being paid the minimum wage. So we talk about modern slavery, and we've said it can be internationally, but it can be internally, obviously. But if you're not paid the minimum wage, which is presumably a lawful wage, is that modern slavery?
The answer is it could be, and we have colleagues at gang labour association trading standards who would look into things like that, because actually what you need to ask yourself is if the minimum wage is there for a reason to stop people being exploited as cheap labour, and if you are not being paid the minimum wage, arguably you are being exploited for somebody else's gain. They are paying you less so that they can make more profit from your labour. So it absolutely could be modern slavery and exploitation. We need to know more about the circumstances of it, particularly. Every case is different, but it certainly could be. Exploitation in its purest form is a person exploiting another person for their own financial benefit. regardless of what the exploitation looks like. It's trading people as a commodity to make money. And, interestingly, what people don't realise from modern slavery is actually second internationally to the drugs trade, this is the most lucrative way to make money. It makes more money than guns. Which people find a really interesting fact. They don't understand the scale of it. And actually, in the UK alone, a conservative estimate of the number of modern slaves is 100,000. That's nowhere near the reality. In the world, it's millions. 1 in every 1,000 people is actually enslaved across the world. So this is an absolutely enormous problem. And that's what we try and get home to people, because the scale of it just goes unknown. Sometimes people don't realise they're being exploited. If they're happy to work for £5 an hour, because actually in their home country, if they're not native to the UK, they would be earning £1 an hour. They will do that, but they are still being exploited to somebody else's ends to make money.
A really great explanation, Kerry. Thank you, and it shows why you're an expert in this field. So thank you to the person on YouTube that gave us that question, because that really gave some clarity, and just that interesting point that Kerry, if you're not being paid the minimum wage, of course you're being exploited, but we need obviously more detail. We need to understand that. But fantastic question. Thank you so much. Let's just cover that modern slavery helpline, and I want to get it right, so I'll just have a quick look at it. Kerry mentioned the modern slavery helpline, and that is for anybody to call, Kerry? Absolutely
anybody. It's anonymous reporting. It's the same as Crime Stoppers, and you can call Crime Stoppers as well, whatever you feel comfortable doing. But it's where you can, if you want to be anonymous, where you can report your concerns, and then that will come through to us, and we will follow that up. All I would say is if it's an immediate concern for someone's safety, please do consider calling the police, because we want to take action as soon as we can. But if you just have some concerns and they're not immediate, and nobody is immediately in danger that you can see, and you feel more comfortable doing that, then please do.
And I think just on that, a plea from me in the detective world, detail is key, because if you calling anonymously, it really is anonymously. And I've been in a position before where I've gone to the likes of Crime Stoppers, absolutely begging them to find out, can I know more? Do you know this? And they genuinely can't tell me. And it's like, you've just given me, a smoking gun here. I need to do something with it. But if there'd just been a little bit more detail, it would have been okay. But it's like, please do call, but please do be as descriptive as you possibly can, because it really can make the difference.
It's a really important point now, Martin. Thanks. Absolutely, Crime Stoppers, we know you can be anonymous. But the modern slavery helpline, don't think that we will know who it is, but as Martin says, please give us as much information as you can, because we can't get back to you, and that's the point Martin is making. If you give us something, please, as much as you can, because we've got no way of coming back to you. So we've added the modern slavery telephone number and the Crime Stoppers number within our Facebook page for you, and we'll make sure we cover them a bit later on. James, I just want to talk about the community again, because it's a fascinating... Surrey's a lovely county, absolutely marvellous county. And although you work and are the commander for Runnymede on the north of Surrey, you have an overarching view of Surrey as a whole. Mm-hmm. So the community, really key. We've spoken about it before. But what would they need to be looking out for within the community?
Yeah. So some of the signs that we've discussed around those telltale signs of exploitation. So if people are attending car washes, then do they have the right protective equipment? Does that person look like they've been eating, like they've been able to look after themselves? Those kind of signs. Also, if you're shopping in the high street, if you're looking at places which only accept cash, that could be a telltale sign that something more is going on behind there. With those financial irregularities, quite often comes modern slavery as well. There's other sites such as brothels and locations where we find cannabis grows are often in rented properties. So one for lettings agents or people who rent their own property to be aware of is a property being used for that purpose. Mm. Are the windows being kind of darkened out to facilitate that, or are there irregular comings and goings from that property? And the neighbours around that rented property may spot those signs.
So interestingly, no different to our our general policing advice, similar to fly tipping. If you're paying somebody cheap money and they haven't got the correct registration, you're helping that crime to be committed. So letting agents, really interesting that cannabis factories, if you like, can be in dwellings next door to you and you might not know. So we look for that community engagement.
Yeah. And the link to modern slavery there is that quite often an individual will be brought into that property to look after those cannabis plants, and they won't be being paid to do that. They'll have been potentially brought into the country to do that and won't have access to their travel documents and really have no way out of that situation.
Which takes us back round to what Kerry was saying about that forced imprisonment, and what Martin was saying is you will never pay your debt because somebody controls your life and controls your paperwork.
If you are a letting agent and someone's coming in offering to pay 6 months up front, that's a big red flag.
But that would be an interesting bit of information to pass through either the Modern Slavery Helpline, Crime Stoppers or 101 or online with Surrey Police.
I would just say, I mean, my mum used to work in property management and some horror stories that she could tell. But if you're a letting agent and someone's saying, I want to let this property and I'm going to give you 6 months rent up front at the point they're paying their deposit, for me that's big red flag.
Yep.
And I've been into some rental properties that have been converted into cannabis factories and there's been tens of thousands of pounds worth of damage. Literally ceilings pulled down, walls knocked down. It's just not worth it. It might be quick cash, 6 months up in front, but the long-term cost is far higher. So I would just be mindful of things like that.
Goes back to the community though, James, how important it is for all of us to know our neighbours, to talk to each other, to have that kind of knowledge of your street or your high street or whatever, and just take an interest in everybody without being too interested, I guess. Debbie's asking us another question, and Debbie's asking if, thanks Debbie, and good evening to you. If you're really concerned about someone, would it be helpful, as well as some information, so where they are, would it be beneficial to try and get a discreet photograph of them, or would that be breaking any laws? Well, Debbie, really interesting question. Yeah. So, Kerry, I can see you're ready. Go ahead.
I would say that isn't actually one of the most important things for us, because obviously, unless we know that person already, that won't necessarily help us. What we really need is like Martin said, is the details. So, if this relates to a property, if you can tell us the address of the property, if you can describe where it is, as much about it in that road. What does the front of the property look like? What do the windows look like? Are there any cars outside? All of those kind of things. A description of the person, so we can get a gender, an approximate age. Do they usually look a certain way? Do they have glasses on like I do? All of those kind of things. And actually we could deal with, have we found the right person later? But what I wouldn't want anyone to do is be in a situation where perhaps something confrontational happened for all the right reasons, because they're worried about somebody, because you do obviously have to respect people's privacy, and it's very difficult to get a photograph of somebody without somebody knowing. So I would say don't do that, because you might create a situation which is difficult. And of course, going back to what we said earlier, if someone is being watched and somebody's controlling them and they see the photograph of them being taken, there could be consequences for that person. Or what could happen is they pack up and they go, and then they're starting again somewhere else.
And we lose them.
And we lose them. So that's not important so much. It's all in the detail. Who, where, what do they look like? What do you know? What are you seeing? What is it that's making you worried? And describe as much as you can about the things you can see that are concerning you. And as I said, location, all of that kind of stuff. That's best.
But if you've got dash cam footage or anything like that you would have as a matter of course, or home CCTV, there's no harm in have some stills. But I wouldn't put yourself on offer by going out your way to.
Thank you. Thanks. Debbie, I hope that answers your question. Thank you for sending this in. I've got a question from Stephanie, and just having a look at the clock. We'll get that in, Stephanie. But I've just thought of a point that Kerry spoke about that I just want to ask James about. And it's about that when we used to, or I've seen on Hollywood movies where generally an American will drive up to the Mexican border, or a group of Mexicans say, do you want some work? And they jump in a pickup and off they go. That's modern slavery, but that's in a Hollywood movie. Does that happen in the UK?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So it can be in many types of exploitation, but particularly in forced labour. People will, the victims will be all living potentially at one central location in very poor conditions, multiple people in a room, very unsanitary and no food. And then a van will come up and collect them all, and they will all go off to a site for the day, for example, and do that work with very little or no pay, and then be brought back to those conditions again. So again, yeah, that would be a good sign, and one we definitely want to know about.
So Stephanie, I think that kind of links into your question, because you said, what about around Christmas with the homeless looking people who get dropped off by car and then picked up? Is that a con or is that slavery? And that's almost what I'm imagining, people going around knocking on doors, either selling or charity work or something, I guess. Martin, is that something that
There's
rings
different
true?
forms. So the obvious one for me is those that just I'm not want to single out. I'm just going to use it as an example, like lane driveways. There's been several cases where people have been exploited. They've been picked up for, I'm going to pay you a day's wage to come and assist with laying a driveway, and then they've either not been paid at all or have been paid half, and then it's too late. You know, they don't want to argue. So those are signs, and we have. In fact, I've read a concern today for some builders. Somebody rang up. This isn't quite right. Police have gone and visited, and okay, there's some immigration stuff that needs to be sorted out by them, but they're not victims of modern slavery. So that's a classic example. There are others, building trade labourers, those sorts of things, people that have not got the documents or the right equipment, like going back to what we said earlier about the car washes, that could be telltale signs. So it does happen, and it does happen on a massive scale.
And that was an interesting point where, Kerry, we've spoken about it before, but that cross-working with our partner agencies, so trading standards would come across, dodgy driveways, dodgy plumbers, dodgy carpenters, or what have you, and we could link in with that because there might well be modern slavery offences in there.
Yeah, and I don't know, I'm not 100% sure what Stephanie, I'm just going back to, she was sort of saying about kind of homeless people, and that could be people legitimately, selling stuff, and that's an organised charity, way of doing that, people making an income, but if she's talking about potentially people in the town centres that she's seeing that happen, organised begging is another form of exploitation. We do encounter that where, teams of people will be dropped off to beg, and there's kind of telltale signs really that you can look for in terms of that, and they are things like people having signs that are written in the same handwriting, because very often people sit with signs in front of them. If you speak to those individuals and perhaps they sound like they all speak a different language, something else to look out for is something we call scripting, which is when you ask somebody if they're okay, or you ask them a question and there's a set answer that they've been told to give, set information. So that is an issue, and we do have that as an issue in Surrey, and we've recently done some work around that, some awareness raising work through our problem solving team to try and tackle that. That doesn't mean that's the case in all cases, but there certainly are examples that we've experienced where people are being brought here under the pretext of them being homeless and begging, but actually it is being done in an organised, coordinated way. And of course, those people then get taken away. They're usually not from Surrey, and we don't know what happens to them. We don't know what happens to the money they get, but we can pretty much guarantee that the existence they've got probably isn't a great one.
So we talk about modern slavery, and throughout this discussion with you as experts, and I work in the police, but we can see actually the ripple effects of modern slavery is not only emotionally for the people, but it ripples throughout all industries and all communities, doesn't it? There's not any area that can't be exploited by those that want to exploit
Absolutely.
people.
And the knock-on effect is an interesting point here, because I don't mind talking about it, but myself personally, there's scars, mental scars and stuff that you deal with when you're dealing with people that they're lowest, and it's hard to switch off. I'll be quite honest. I've been kept awake at night with some of the stuff, and that's personal cost to me.
Imagine that's the effect having on you, what it's having on that
exactly,
person.
and you can multiply that 100 when you look at like some of the victims that I've encountered, and I just think, the bravery some of these people show when they speak out is absolutely phenomenal. And, you know, what I experience is a fraction of what they must have been through. And I think that the message that I would like to say to anybody who may see this, or anyone who is being exploited before we finish, is, you know, we really can help. As has already been said, it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be an investigation and we are going to lock people up, because that can, in some cases, increase the risk. But we can safeguard you, we can get you away, we can help you with support agencies, and, you know, we really, really can help.
Thanks, Martin. You know, a real good way to wrap up. And I think just as we finalise, I'd like to thank Kerry, James and Martin for being with us tonight, and for opening up modern slavery and just how impactful it is to our communities. But like everything, crime is rare in Surrey. We are in a safe county. Thank you so much for tuning in, and look forward to the next episode.
Thanks for watching this week's episode. Tune in next week to hear me speak with our guests about county lines, drugs and antisocial behaviour, and how we work with partners to reduce these crimes in Surrey. Please share any questions you have in the comments, and don't forget to tune in from 6 p.m. on Thursday the 17th of March.